Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find, talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all of the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
We're back at RSA Conference 2024, Moscone West, Broadcast Alley. We're in day 4. So some of us are running on fumes, like me, Jeff Mann, co-host of Paul's Security Weekly. But I am here today to talk to Guy Guzner. He is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Savvy. Guy, welcome.
Thank you.
Good
Great
morning.
being here.
How are you holding up, day 4?
Well, this is the last day of the conference. It's tough, like you say, on fumes, but at least we can see the end is near.
Great. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Guy. What's your background? How'd you get into cyber?
Well, my background is actually very, very simple. I've been doing only one thing my entire career, and that's cybersecurity. And when I talk about my career, I think I started by the age of 16, where I was one of those kids using a dial-up modem, getting into places where I shouldn't, trying to see how far I can take this. And I've been...
So you're a hacker.
I'm once a hacker, always a hacker,
It's a lifestyle.
It is.
It's a frame of mind. So how far back are we talking in terms of when you got your start there?
Well, I got my start in the early days of the 90s where, there weren't really any commercial internet. So in order to get online,
some of us remember that time.
Yeah, you remember? Well, we're that old, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It seems funny this age, but to get online, I had to hack into universities or other organizations because there was nothing commercial. There was no Wi-Fi or 5G back then. People can't imagine that.
Nope. But nowadays we walk around with these smartphones and we can use them as tethering devices. So I'm back to using a modem again.
Well,
it's a lot faster modem.
You're always using some kind of a modem. There's always some kind of a signal that gets modulated. I think that most people don't even know what is the concept of modem, but back then you really had to learn the basics of networking and how everything works, and I think that's really what helped me in my career.
I mean, it's really foundational and building blocks for some of us that are old enough to remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, for me, it's a little bit of a struggle to understand the modern networking and APIs and where's the perimeter and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, there's still a computer somewhere, and it's still connected to a network somehow.
Yeah.
But real quick, I have a question for you, and this is more for the benefit of our main host, Paul. We have sort of a running friendly competition. Everybody we interview, we ask, what's your favorite hacker movie? So what is your favorite hacker movie?
My favorite hacker movie would be a classic war games, with Matthew Broderick, because
that's how you started.
I kind of relate to that. I mean, I was kind of part of that movie.
That's exactly what you were doing.
Because I ended up also being caught.
Okay.
So that's very real for me.
Gotcha. Well, he is team hackers. I am team sneakers. But War Game is sort of a special movie. It's the grandfather of all hacker movies. But so we could talk hacking all day, but let's talk about Savvy. You know, tell us a little bit about the company and what came about. How did you start it and why?
Well, it's interesting because Savvy is kind of a progression of my career, and in
Mm-hmm.
the end, it's coming back to the basic. I've spent time in our career doing network security, being a long time at Checkpoint, and later started the company securing browsers and applications in Fireglass, and then I realized, well, the cybersecurity problem still comes back to the human
Yep.
part of it, much back like it was 30 years ago. People are still doing stupid things that
Right.
get companies compromised. And how do you deal with this? And especially in the world today of SaaS and IT, where it's so easy to consume different services, onboard new things, put your data in different places,
Mm-hmm.
enjoy all the new promises of AI that is going to change the world, but there is a price to pay for that, and that's security. And that comes back to the freedom that we have as users and the power that we have, and then the mistakes that we're using. So Savvy is there
Mm-hmm.
to help us use all this technology,
Mm-hmm.
but within some guardrails that it's not about allowing or blocking and creating that policy. It will allow you to use, but make sure that you do it and you don't do any security violation. Don't use a reused password. Don't use a compromised account. Make sure that you have MFA going on. Don't
Right.
do any risky kind of
Right.
configuration. And when that access is no longer necessary, you leave the company, you do something else. Let's make sure that we remove that access so it doesn't use someday to get into
Right.
the organization.
I mean, we're coming from the same era, and we've seen how many generations of shiny objects, silver bullets, the next
Oh,
big thing,
oh,
and yeah, yeah. What is it this year? But
yeah.
I am encouraged in my old age that people are finally starting to pay attention to focus to the things we were saying 30 years ago that you need to do, the non-sexy. There is no tool or product or solution that's going to make you choose a good password, do things responsibly,
Hmm.
follow a pattern, do the right thing, follow a policy, follow a set of
Yeah.
rules, follow a set of procedures. So mildly hopeful that that's becoming a thing. I'm still a little um, sickened by how that still often gets packaged into a product because we're sitting across from Moscone with I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands
Thousand.
of vendors,
Yeah.
thousands of
Yeah.
vendors. And if you implemented every one of those solutions,
Yeah.
you'd still fall because you had an employee or a user that had a weak password or had a
Oh,
password that was carelessly
yeah.
found on the dark web because they were also using it for their whatever account.
Absolutely. I mean, we see this all the time, just
Right.
with the recent change health breach, which has massive implication.
Yeah.
It takes one account, not using MFA, like okay, basic control, and this is where you get in, and from there, yeah, you have lateral movement
Right.
and all that, and data being exfiltrated. But that single point of just making the right decision could have prevented the whole thing from
Right.
happening,
Right.
right?
And well, we could keep going on
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
so what are you trying to communicate to organizations? Why look at Savvy? Why what are you offering as a tool to help organizations
Yeah.
suck left?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing is that in order to protect something, you need to know about. So the first is
Sure.
how do you discover about all of these different accounts and
Mm.
rogue identities and all the places that people have been onboarding and using stuff? And there's no one way, there's no one single bullet that will
Right.
cover everything. So we are
No,
collecting.
there's thousands of bullets.
Oh yeah, they're yeah, a whole arsenal here.
Yep.
But we took multiple approaches that we look at what people are doing in the web through a browser extension. Look at
Okay.
emails, because whenever you onboard an application, there's some kind of a sign up message. We do API integration with the cloud to collect data from there, and or if you're going to a certain website, we have a technology that can query that website, that application, and gather data from there, and then we can consolidate everything, so at least you have now an inventory of all the accounts, all the identities, and then what are the risk factors where people have been doing bad stuff like reusing their passwords,
Right.
using compromised accounts, doing all kinds of violations. And then is how do you create those automations and guardrails to engage them to say, oh, you go to a compromised account, let's help you change the password now. You've been reusing your corporate password. We're going to reset that for you. So it's also about how to make it easy to remediate, so you don't need to remember, oh, this is where I need to go, or maybe, I say, well, I'll do it later. It just also make it this very accessible as it happens, make it easy to remediate, and also when you no longer need that access, you leave the company, you do something else, you don't lose the application, then how do we safely automate just resetting that account so there's no longer access available?
Right. Are are you approaching this because, from to me, from a policy process perspective, organizations should know who all their users are. They should know what all the accounts are. Everybody's got GPOs for access based on groups or role. I mean, my day job is an advisor and assessor,
Yeah.
and so I'm going into companies
Yeah.
seeing that they're doing all those things, but are they really, or are they fooling me?
Well, they're doing a lot of these things, but this is how things used to be done in the past. And if we
Right.
think about how the whole model of consumption of IT
Mm-hmm.
has changed. In the past, you go to a company, someone sets an account on
Right.
their AD, and then they onboard the application for you, and you need to wait a month until you get all those
Yep.
things and all the access, and only
Yep.
then you can really start working.
Right.
Today, with the cloud transformation that allows to create applications and services so easily, we are
Right.
aware of at least 200,000 SaaS apps out
Wow.
there. When you go to a company, you set your email address on Office 365 or Google or something, and now you can just start onboarding those applications. So
And I'm no longer sitting at a workstation with a static
no,
IP address,
no,
and I always come from the same place.
no. You maybe you're at
Right.
home,
Yeah.
maybe you're on the road, maybe you're somewhere where you're
And I
always.
might be on the work laptop, I might be on the
Yeah,
home
you
laptop,
might.
or the device, or the
Yeah, you might
tablet, or
be
the phone,
at
or
the
the
RSA
TV.
conference
Yeah.
now, right?
Right.
And then when you look at it, also a lot of that IT has become led by the business,
Right.
not by IT, because they want to drive productivity. They want
Right.
to capture more business. They want to use the latest
Mhm.
AI
The best big
tools
thing. Yeah.
there to do the work from them. So if we thought in the past about shadow IT and just how we find it and
Mm-hmm.
we blocked it and just we nailed everything and we closed everything,
Right.
that doesn't work anymore. We need to embrace the fact that IT is being commoditized to a place that business owners, that even single individuals can become their own CIOs and onboard their own apps. And then what do you do as a security team? You just keep telling them no,
Right.
or embrace that and understand that we need to think about this differently and let them do that, but provide the guardrails of how you can really do this safely.
Well, I would love to talk more, but unfortunately our time is up, and we need to talk shop in the old times sometime soon. That's going to wrap for us. If you want to learn more about Savvy and what they're doing to try to help companies get control of that thing that we've lost control of, go to securityweekly.com/Savvy, RSAC. Guy, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Coming down the home stretch. We're recording live in Broadcast Alley in Moscone West. And I am Jeff Mann, co-host of Paul Security Weekly. And I'm here this morning to talk to Pranava Adduri. He is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Bedrock Security. Pranava, welcome to the set. Welcome to RSA.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into cybersecurity.
Absolutely. So I spent the better part of a decade doing data protection and data security. That journey started at Rubrik. I was there as one of the founding engineers, and Rubrik was in the data protection space. So originally, our goal was to build the enterprise time machine. We took something that was age-old, made it really cool and fun for people to use. And the idea was we were versioning workloads over time. Now, in 2018, ransomware made a resurgence, and this time came for good. Or for bad, if you, depending on how you want to slice that.
Permanently.
And Rubrik made a bet that resilience would be a key part of that story. Because we were taking these workload backups anyway. If you got hit with ransomware, you could use Rubrik to get back up and running. And to really tell that narrative around ransomware, we also built a series of products to help detect ransomware and in progression. Because if you're taking these backups, you can see when they're getting encrypted. And in flight, you can call out, hey, you should be checking out these workloads. So I led that team for that product line. And that was my transition to the data security side of the equation, combating ransomware. It was an amazing transition. Really enjoyed jumping headfirst in. And I continued that journey at AWS as well. And AWS was interesting because with AWS Data Protection Services, a lot of the Fortune 500 were asking us about how do I defend against ransomware? Our answer was go back it up. And their response was, we have 50 petabytes of data. Do you want us to back it all up? So this idea of how do you layer your resilience around what matters most was something that was taking root there, And if you think about the types of data that are worth protecting, there's regulated data, there's core IP, and then there's operational data. And for an enterprise, it's important to be able to understand where all of those sit across their many environments to be able to layer the appropriate protections. And so that was where the seeds for Bedrock were formed. I got reconnected with the investor, one of the investors that I knew, and started incubating at Greylock, and we started the company in 2022.
You had nothing else to do. We were locked down.
Exactly.
Might as well build a company.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is Bedrock then offering to the community?
What we're really going after is there's a lot of data being generated right now. And if there's one thing I can say about data, it is dynamic. It does not sit still. Dynamic data and static rules for detecting that data don't go well together. And so a lot of enterprises and teams that are trying to operationalize some of the legacy DLP tools, some of the legacy tools around managing access to data, they're playing a game of whack-a-mole. They try to find sensitive data, something slips by, someone has to investigate it, they have to tune the rule, so on, rinse and repeat. And so the time to value for these types of tools is measured in 12 to 18 months in terms of getting them operationalized. And so when we set out to create Bedrock, our question was, how do we dramatically reduce that? And so I kind of alluded to this earlier, static rules don't work for dynamic data. And securing data is actually a business problem, not purely a security problem. So you have to learn from the business what's most important if you want to have any shot at keeping up and reducing that effort down. So what Bedrock is doing, we introduced this concept called AI reasoning. You said the word AI. Add it to the tip jar. But the idea is this. If you hired me to do data security and you said, Pranava, W-2s are restricted, W-4s are restricted, then I go off and start doing my job. If I see a 1099 form, even if I've never seen it before, based on the contents, I would reason that it's similar to the first two,
Right.
and therefore it's also restricted.
Right.
That's what we're doing at scale.
Gotcha.
Air, you can think about hiring Air as an employee that never sleeps, is learning your data 24/7, learning what's important to the business and keeping up. And the shift that we're seeing for our customers is that the time to value is going from 12 to 18 months to people are getting up and running in a week. Right. And it's really reducing that game of whack-a-mole, of understanding, constantly keeping up constantly tuning what's most important and iterating on these rules.
Right.
So that's what we set out to build at Bedrock.
It's an interesting concept. I began my career in information security at an organization whose title was information security for a certain 3-letter agency back in the 80s. And we did data security. And back then it was mostly data in flight. And it was over radio waves and telephones and Morse code machines and things like that. But coming out into the private sector many years ago and trying to teach the world what I had learned about how to do data security, and collectively we've failed miserably because of forces at play that we won't get into, but just the concept of focusing on the data, which is now something I'm hearing more about in the last couple of years. It's like, oh, they're finally getting the message. It's all about the data. One of my favorite movies is Sneakers, favorite hacker movies. It came out in 1992, and the most important line in that movie is where the bad guy and the good guy are talking, and the bad guy, Ben Kingsley, is saying, Marty, there's a world war out here, and it's not fought with bullets, it's fought with information. Everything you see and know and feel, it's all about the information. 1992, and we're just getting around to that, 40 years later, 30 years later, and trying to figure that out.
Absolutely.
I often talk about, the data back then. When I was a kid, we got this book delivered to our doorstep once a year that had name, address, phone number for everybody. That was not private information. But in the beginnings of the internet age, we started worrying about protecting the information, like you said, is on the 1099, the W2, W4, and back then, as we understood what the sensitive data was, at least the personal data. But now it's so much more. I'm glad that there's companies out there that are realizing that. I'm glad that there's a concept of you can't protect everything at the same level. Not that you want to throw away the data, but can you tell us a little bit, without revealing the secret sauce, how it works?
Yeah. So, and one thing I'll touch back to what you're saying is because it really is about focusing on what's important,
right?
Because there's far too much data for any one team to be going out to look at,
right,
and make sense of it all continuously and protect it.
Sure.
And so, in terms of prioritizing what's most important to the business, the peel back here is in that example of a W2's, you tell me a W2 is restricted, you tell me a W4 is restricted,
right?
A 1099 should also be restricted based on its contents.
Right.
Maybe the peeling back layer there is you have to have the ability to relate those two. And there's a couple of factors that enable this. One is we have this whole AI revolution going on right now.
Yep.
One of the core enablers of that was embeddings and transformer architectures. The ability to vectorize content and relate them and put them close together.
Okay.
So that's one of the bits that helps us understand the similarity between data. Different types of data require different forms of similarity analysis.
Right.
If you have a document, you can use transformer models to say, well, this document is very similar to this other document. That's one example.
Okay.
But I also mentioned that it's not just about regulated data. It's about core IP. It's about operational data as well.
Right.
So you might have data that, like, for example, one of the companies that we're working with, they deal with gene sequences. these gene sequences are 4 letters, copied and pasted and permuted across files that are gigabytes in size.
Right.
For them, the most important use case is to be able to put a boundary of trust around certain core patented gene sequences and ensure that they're only being used for authorized, sanctioned use cases. Right? They don't want them copied into unsanctioned R&D and being used to deliver products that are not within the legal scope of its usage.
Sure.
But how do you detect that? The nature of gene editing is you drop gene sequences, you compact them, you modify them, and the traditional way of doing this would be to take an exact file hash and say, okay, this hash is showing up here, therefore someone copied it. But that doesn't work. So again, the problem is about similarity. How do you detect that this is actually related to this? There, our coming from the world of backup really helps, because you can actually look at it as an overlap problem, right? How much are these 2 files overlapping? So depending on the type of workload, we have heuristics and technologies to relate the content together.
Right.
And based on that, we can also start inferring how important is this to the business.
So in an attempt to see if I'm understanding you, using the analogy of the W-2 or the W-4, let's say somebody changes their address on the form, but let's say it's not even the full street address in city and state, it's just they moved down the block or something like that. So everything's the same except for maybe the street number. That's what you're talking about, kind of, is being able to isolate that and change things without having to like copy the whole form over, type of thing.
Well, it's about learning what makes the documents important. So if and I'll maybe put a little bit more context around that document example.
Sure.
Let's say really the policy that, Jeff, you want me to build is that restricted data cannot be emailed outside of our business.
Okay.
Right? And you tell me, for example, a W-2 is restricted, a W-4 is restricted, right? And if I try to email that out, some solution will block it. But in order for that to happen, it needs to be marked as restricted. So it needs to be known that format is that particular.
Well, I was going to ask. I mean, I can imagine some search engines are just looking for the file name that has W-2 or W-4 in it, and not much more.
Yeah, and
you're looking inside and saying, smells like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
Right.
This is probably a W-4.
Right.
It's more along those lines.
Exactly. And the forward thing that you just mentioned is metadata. Is a metadata approach to classification. It doesn't. It's very prone to false positives, right?
Sure.
Just as an example of a false positive that could come just by looking at the name is if you had a PDF named w2_instructions.pdf, that could also get flagged as restricted.
Right.
So you do need to look at the contents as well. You need to get the full picture, right? Because if someone flagged this to you, how would you figure out if it was a true positive or not? You would look at the contents, you'd look at the name, you'd look at the environment, you'd look at the sender. All of that would go into your final judgment call of whether it was sanctioned to be sent or not.
Right.
So it's
so with what you're doing, you're successful at that. You're figuring out that, and you have your customers. I would guess at some point they got to say, this is what matters. This doesn't matter as much. This we don't really care about. You can sort of lead them to we've categorized or labeled everything, but they still have to know what to do with it. But then you can help them do that, right?
Right.
Okay.
And so, coming back to what I said at the start, the security team is typically administering these tools,
right?
But they don't have, like, the business is moving. The business is always
the business context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the most important thing to do here is not to overwhelm people, right? Because security teams, we have a chart that we show that data is growing exponentially, but security and GRC teams are growing linearly.
Right.
So the most important thing is to come back and say, look, these are the 5 most important things we found. Do you agree? And if not, you can actually tune the system with an English description, right? And the idea is to rapidly calibrate on what's important. And I like to joke that if anyone ever says that there's 0 false positives or negatives in the solution, you should run the other way, because that's just not possible.
Right.
But it's all about how
eliminate risk. It's not a thing.
There you go.
Hey, well, our time's going fast. We are wrapping things up here, but appreciate you talking today and helping an old timer like me start to understand a little bit more about what's at play and what's involved in classifying data and capturing data and keeping companies afloat and in business. So thank you.
Absolutely.
If you want to find more information out about Bedrock Security, go to securityweekly.com/Bedrock RSAC. That's going to wrap for now. Thank you. Thanks a lot.